Welcome to the latest in the GLS Masterclass series. Today we'll be talking about how to architect an effective legal managed services program within your in-house legal team. Matthew Glynn, Chairman of GLS, will be your presenter today. As some quick housekeeping before we start, can I please ask you to submit all of your questions via the chat function during the course of the presentation, and we'll answer each of the questions at the end. And with that, over to you, Matthew.
Thanks, Nick. Welcome everyone to this GLS Legal Ops community event. We're really glad to have you with us. As Nick mentioned, I'm Matthew Glynn, the Managing Director of the GLS Group, and we're the leading provider of legal operations and in-house support resources across Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Africa. Start by getting the attention. That's what they say. It's a secret to a great webinar. So how's this for an opener? If managed legal services were a movie, we would cast Tom Cruise as the lead actor. Why? Well, Tom has a long history of playing a recognized hero who then unceremoniously falls from grace and has to face his fears, reinvent himself, and then ultimately makes a spectacular comeback to the cheers of adoring fans. Over the next 60 minutes, I will make the case that managed legal services, whilst not quite offering the mental popcorn appeal of a good Tom Cruise movie, has followed a similar trajectory of the likes of Top Gun and Days of Thunder. And the last 25 years plus of managed services, in fact, offers us some very valuable lessons that we can share today on how to architect a managed legal services program. We're going to keep things really simple and try and focus most of this session on the juicy stuff. So this webinar is broken up into 4 parts. We're going to have a quick tour of the managed services domain. We're going to spend a bit of time focusing on the causes of historic failure of managed legal services programs. And then we're going to really unpack and explore what we see are the key architectural principles for designing an effective managed services program. And then we're going to pull it all together. We're going to wrap up the overall context of managed services, the strategy. We're going to talk about some to-dos and definitely some not to-dos. So let's jump right in. So our introduction and overview is like this. Managed services is effectively getting third parties to manage certain processes for your legal department. The idea, conceptually at least, is that the third party can do things better, faster, cheaper, arguably more safely than you can. Historically, excuse me, managed services have started off with lower order, less complicated, less risky type of legal department processes. But let's add a little bit more color into this managed legal services picture via a 3-minute tour of the MLS industry over the last 25 years. And then let's try and give it a scorecard. So we're going to talk about the trends, the focus of managed services, and also the benefits. If we talk about the focus, well, as mentioned, it tends to be those sort of lower order legal tasks such as document review and management, increasingly more sophisticated as the years go by into contract drafting. But this is a very typical menu of managed legal services that LPO providers might offer you. Okay, the trends of the industry over the last 30 years, 25 years are as follows. Managed legal services started to get a toehold in the late 90s, starting off with those low-level tasks. In the early 2000s, you started to see the emergence of formal LPO service providers, which started entering this low-end level task, but on a large scale. So review, translation, research type tasks. The mid-2000s, you started to see some of the largest MNCs actually establishing their own global delivery centers in locations such as India, South Africa, the Philippines, and more recently, Ireland. Late 2010s, you're seeing an increasing scope in terms of what kind of legal function tasks that the service providers are trying to support. Higher value services such as drafting, analytics, e-discovery, IP management, and the like. But in recent years, so from 2020s onwards, there is a distinct trend in terms of insourcing, bringing things back out in-house, but also strategic partnerships. And that reflects the search for balance that the in-house environment has in terms of outsourcing things and retaining key critical functions inside. The benefits? Well, managed legal services providers at least, offer a very long list of attractive potential benefits that can be realized. Cost savings, who wouldn't want that? Access to specialized expertise, operational efficiencies, enhanced risk management, flexibility, technology and innovation, mitigate staffing concerns. Everybody has headcount restrictions from time to time, accelerating turnaround times and the like. With such a compelling list of theoretical benefits, how then has the managed legal service industry performed? And in order to give them a scorecard result, I say in advance that we are painting with a broad brush. So how do we score them? Let's just say that expectations, of which many were harbored by the client and many promised by the provider, have largely remained unfulfilled. If we were to define failure of a managed services program not as the contract ends up litigated, but the expectations of the customers were substantially underwhelmed, in our experience, we'd say that more than 80% of managed legal services contracts have underwhelmed. Industry trends definitely bear this out, as I've just covered. What was being sent out over the last 2 decades is increasingly coming back in-house. Now, whilst this is an overall picture or an overall scorecard, it is by no means a complete picture. There is actually a tremendous qualitative development occurring in the managed legal services space. And this is really important, as the early successes of managed legal services were not so much based on supply side ingenuity, but largely facilitated by down to how poorly and inefficiently things were being handled in the in-house community. Before anyone takes offense to that, we're talking about an in-house community as it existed 20, 25 years ago, where any kind of improvement could be made that would resonate in terms of cost savings. But more of a detailed unpack on that later. So let's spend a little bit of time exploring why something that looks so promising hasn't really managed to perform as expected. Well, here are the 10 most commonly cited reasons as to why managed legal services programs fail. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. I just want you to be aware of the headings, right? We've got inadequate planning, poor vendor selection, oversold deals, it's a big one, unclear scope and expectations, comms challenges, governance challenges, insufficient change management. That's an important one which you'll come to. It's the internal user is not brought along the journey and then becomes reluctant to engage. Lack of flexibility, data security, unrealistic cost savings expectations. Okay. There is, however, one root cause of failure that I really want to drill down into, and that is that of inadequate planning, which I believe to be the root cause of the failure of pretty much every managed legal services program. But what I would like to do is I want to recast that cause of failure more as a question. And that question is as follows. What do you, as the customer of a managed legal services program, what do you want the provider to provide you? In our view, the client's inability to ask, or more worryingly, the provider's unwillingness to ask, is the cause underlying pretty much every one of those 10 causes of MLS failure. Sadly, and this happens in so many domains in which legal support scenarios are procured, I've used my words carefully there, most in-house teams have historically been buying a list of anticipated benefits. They are commonly seduced by the list, and why shouldn't they? They read well. We've just been through it. However, too few have actually been focused on the process that they want managed. Many fall into the trap of, oh, well, it doesn't really so much matter what we're doing at the moment because what we're going to be buying is so much better. This is wrong. This is very wrong. And it's in our view, the single biggest source of failure for a managed legal services program not delivering expectations. Managed legal service solutions are being bought as something that's out of the box, ready to be plugged into your environment, as opposed to being a carefully articulated requirement that works inside your environment that you source from the market. That's the key concept. Managed legal service solutions can't be bought. They must be sourced. The clue's in the name, managed legal services. Someone is managing a process on behalf of your legal team. How the provider might do that task is interesting, but I would contend mostly irrelevant. It's not their ecosystem, it's yours. So in order to set yourself up for success, you need an acute awareness of what you do and how your organization does it. This becomes what's truly key. And what happens all too often is that this is missed. Can a provider manage what you need doing is the key question. So understanding what process it is that works inside your ecosystem becomes critical and makes the MLS a sourcing exercise. You don't buy options from the market, you investigate the compatibility and capability of providers to do what you need doing. So MLS solutions need to be designed, and then they need to be sourced. They can't simply be bought. So let's cover some of the architectural principles for doing just that. There are 4 key principles that I want to unpack. DOSD, as we call it: definition, optimization, sourcing, and delivery. You must invest significant time in defining and assessing what you and your organization need from each of these stages. So let's start with what is absolutely the most important part of the design process: process definition. So this is the first critical success factor that will determine ultimately the success of your program. How well can you articulate what you are currently doing? Remember, it's your process, not the supplier's. It's your process that you want managed by the provider. Again, the clue is managed legal services. You must be capable of delivering a very granular understanding, detailing, and account of what you want managed. Without this, there simply is no managed service. It's you just buying what someone else wants to sell you. You must invest in this process, and you must be able to document what your current processes are. Now, many of you might say, hang on, Matt, how can you say all of this when the key premise, or one of the key premises of a managed legal service, is accessing the expertise? This is right, but mostly wrong in terms of the design process. What you are expert in is your ecosystem, how it works, what it needs, and the process, what kind of process will work within it. So you cannot just buy a provider solution. You need to invest in defining what works for you. And what you do and how you do it is a heavily nuanced proposition, laden with multivariate factors. Let me give you an example. So if we're talking about a managed legal services to support a contracting function, for a simple exercise like this, on the screen are just 15 of the 32 critical process enablers that you must define. Okay. What's the group legal policy environment for that review? What attendant compliance frameworks need to be observed? Privacy, vendor conducts, a code of conducts. What documentation assets, your paper, their paper, process pathways, the like. Do you want a managed service delivered to you that has the provider's view on these key critical process enablers, or your own? Exactly. So you have to invest and in this process and document precisely what it is that you want doing and how you want doing. If you take a visualization of a contract support scenario, just to bear this point out a little more, what's included in each of these stages for the review of a standard contract must be specific to your needs. how an instruction is raised, what kind of acceptable contracting parameters are in place, what paper to use, and the like. These insights, these preferences will not come from a service provider brochure. What you're going to get is cost saving, efficiencies, innovation, etc. That is the advertising part of it, the mere puff. So, by way of, and to really emphasize this point by means of a recap, it's your process that you're being asked to manage. Price, which is one of the key attraction points historically, is utterly irrelevant if the managed legal service doesn't work in your solution. 80% of teams in our experience are underwhelmed, as they should be, if they've just bought a provider's benefits list. So serious is this point in terms of identifying what your process is and then sourcing a provider that can support it. When it comes to our own managed legal services, our take on diagnostic phase has more than 150 diagnostic points that we look at in relation to a basic contract function. This is the way that we know what the customer actually wants. Let's look at design principle 2. Okay, we are incrementally building up and making the overall solution emerge. Design principle 2. This reflects the stark reality of a very simple proposition. Benefits flow from an optimized process. Think about it. I'll put it another way. If you give something that is an inefficient process to someone to manage, what kind of results are you expecting? If the underlying process which you hand to a third party is inefficient, what are you expecting? So in stage 2, we're investing time and effort in identifying what an optimized version of the process that you want managed is. And again, this doesn't mean that you have to be the expert, but your view on whether it will work in your ecosystem remains paramount. Yes, to the pundits that were saying that they want private expertise, that's why they're doing it. This is the time that you can lean in on your vendor and ask for their expertise, ask for recommendations on how to optimize different parts of the managed legal service process. But ultimately, you need to determine if it will work because it's your ecosystem. But this is key. Remember, once the process is enhanced, including through vendor input, it remains your process, managed legal service. It's your process or function that you're having a third party manage. You need to decide. A good indication of these two principles brought together as they should be, a good indication of a quality managed service is one that can be effortlessly brought back in-house with almost zero interruption. And why is that possible? Simple, because it's your process. Okay? You should be able to pick it up and carry it back into your ecosystem without so much as any kind of major interruptions. Let's illustrate what this optimization phase looks like, because it's not just a matter of signing a contract and expecting magic things to happen. If we stay with the example of contracting, it means, and this is a contracting function, it could be an individual process within the contracting function, like onboarding vendors, it could be the contract review stage, it could be any contract administration, it could be anything, right? But if we stick to look at the contracting function, it means breaking that functional process down into its smallest constituent parts, and then exploring internally or with the help of experts, how you can optimize each stage of that process or function and bring it back together in a far more efficient way. Now, if you look at what's on the screen, these are just 25 key moments or events to be considered in relation to your average contract function. When we look at taking over a contracting function, there are more than 300 data points that we actually look for, okay? So the optimization phase is actually quite a involved, technical, and precise exercise. It goes back to the key point. We do not want to hand over an inefficient process to be managed by a third party. We want an optimal process to be managed by that third party. Okay. 3, process sourcing. I hope the subtlety of the difference that I'm trying to explain between buying someone's solution as opposed to sourcing what you need is understood. The key point is this: don't buy service provider features list. It's a perilous mistake. Just ask all of those teams, and I'm sure pretty much everybody in the call, if you're within a large organization or a large legal team, will have had this experience when it comes to buying a contract management lifecycle system. Okay, features lists don't necessarily translate to what works in your system. So take your stage one and stage two design, and then source a provider who can deliver it. Explore compatibility, explore capability to meet your requirements. And then the final aspect of this, and you have to give some thought to what it looks like, all right? Fortunately, this will only take a minute, is that process delivery. Managed legal services is not a buy and forget legal department resource. Like all in-house legal department resource categories, it must be managed. And you have a role in that. It doesn't matter how simple the task is, there's always going to be the periodic escalation that you want to know about, because maybe you have to develop a new policy that needs to go back into the rules for the reviewing of a contract, which makes the function work more efficiently. Performance management. Every resource category inside your legal team has to have a clear strategy to maximize what it can deliver. Continuous improvement. We are operating in static environments. The end user requirements or feedback are relevant that need to be re-articulated in through the managed legal services solution. Market practices change. Look what's happened to GDPR. All of a sudden, a few years ago, it was very complex. What's GDPR going to mean? And all of a sudden, it's no longer that complex. Company changes. The way in which services are provided need to be accounted for in terms of adjustments to the solution. So let's now take a look at the effect of those 4 design principle-led approach to managed services and overlay that again against those 10 common causes of failure. As you can see very visually from the table, every cited cause of MLS failure is either eliminated or substantially mitigated. You can see I've got in there relevant for lack of flexibility and adaptability. When it comes to low complexity, high volume tasks, I would argue that they don't need to be flexible. What needs to be done is clear, and it just needs to be scalable. So there's not a lot of emphasis placed on that point. But you can see that those design principles go a huge distance to eliminating the prospect of any of those underlying causes of MLS disappointment from actually occurring. So a design-led approach based on those 4 principles is going to make a substantial difference to what you can experience by way of outcomes. Okay. If you're in a rush, you've got things to do, the most important content of this session has been delivered. If you observe those 4 principles, you are going to be far more likely to succeed. But if I can indulge you, just let's hold our focus on success for a little bit longer and just quickly look at 10 tips for MLS success. The bottom line is that success is going to come from your solution design, so you must be absolutely clear about what you manage and how. But for the sake of running through those 10 tips, almost all of those tips are going to be underpinned by the kinds of behavior that you will engage in terms of observing our 4 design principles. Let's run through it. Clear objectives, for sure. Process maps. You've got to map it out in great detail for the reasons that I've shared, particularly around the optimization stage. Choosing the right provider. Okay, you've got to do due diligence. Ask the hard questions. Don't be seduced by the lists. Clear comms channel. It's a resource, you've got to manage it. Collaboration with your stakeholders. This becomes a lot easier when you go through our design processes, because the process will remain yours and part of the legal team, just executed by different personnel. Comprehensive implementation plan, obviously, adequate training, evaluate, monitor performance. Some healthy KPIs are useful there. Pick on qualitative ones as opposed to quantity. Change management. Change management is probably one of the biggest challenges in terms of incorporating something different into your ecosystem. But if you've done the design correctly, the change management incline is substantially less steep. continuous improvement. Obviously, it's not a static solution. You need to always incorporate and upgrade changes and improvements. You can unpack that more and look at that more at your leisure in the follow-up materials. But let's move on to the more juicy of topics typically associated with the Managed Legal Services Program. Yep, that would be a shiny, red, juicy apple. Don't you just want to reach out and take a bite? Where have we heard this before? Well, before I unpack this, for sure, the relevance of costs has changed within the development of the managed legal service industry over the last 20 years. So some of these comments will be applicable to 20 years ago, less applicable today. But for sure, at any point in time, the issue of costs are always important. But you need to be aware, taking our red apple metaphor further, you're entering the Garden of Eden. Low-cost managed legal services, which might range anywhere from $20 to $100 an hour, can at first blush look incredibly enticing. But what do you actually get? And where do you get that from? Anywhere else other than a low-cost jurisdiction? In our experience, and a cursory search on El Gugurado will yield the following customer feedback, typically associated with sourcing solutions in low-cost jurisdictions. Language and communications difficulties and differences, quality and accuracy concerns, time zone issues, responsiveness, cultural differences that can impact work styles, jurisdictional exposure, misalignment. Look, sorry, but you simply do not get the best talent in low-cost jurisdiction. The best talent in low-cost jurisdiction are probably already your colleagues wherever you're located, whether they're in New York, Singapore, London, elsewhere. So a myopic focus on cost savings really is the shiny red apple and leads you away from the proper and true value contribution that managed legal services can make your team. I'm not setting you up for you need to pay more for this stuff. That's far from it, as you will see. But let's really hone in on the managed legal services business case going forward, because it's really very important. Modern day managed legal services strategies are all about increasing legal department outcomes for the same or similar costs of you doing it yourself. Okay. The business case is that it allows you to affect a strategic in-house focus shift with all of the desirable ripple effects that come along with that. Productivity gains, value recognition, enhanced morale, increased scope for business enabling contribution, greater retention. People like to do complex, interesting work, whilst achieving greater amounts of throughput for the processes that are the subject of the managed legal services being achieved for the same or similar price point. If you could achieve both of those things, the value created by the managed services arrangement when strategically tasked is exceptional. Sure, drastic savings can still be made if you're pushing work to law firms. Easy to pull costs out of that scenario. Or if you yourselves haven't sought to optimize your processes, bearing in mind we're operating in this overall increasing more for less, we must perpetually transform climate. So the real discussion for managed legal services is a costs versus value, not costs saved. All right. It's about for the same or similar costs getting exponentially greater value and outcomes from the legal department, which manifest in terms of gains to the business. Low cost per unit of lawyers does not and has never translated into value. It's simply a weak link in a process for modern day managed legal services where everything matters. Okay. Why? Because good lawyers, wherever they are located in the world, cost what they cost. There's very little differential between the cost of good talent anywhere else in the world. And the best lawyers, as I've said earlier, the best lawyers in low-cost jurisdictions are not working for managed legal services providers. You only have to go on and Google what job satisfaction rates are for people that work in those kind of established LPO shops. The best talent in low-cost jurisdiction are already working in my team and in your teams. So, having gone into things in a little bit more detail, notwithstanding the slightly negative overall scorecard, here is the real managed legal services story. Okay, the red line is a perception of managed legal service provider relevance. The blue line is our community, the in-house community. And going up is increased sophistication and efficiency, and the red line going down is diminishing relevance. So we conclude the current state of the industry as follows. The viability of legacy MLS LPO industry has largely and been seriously undermined by in-house teams getting better at what they do. Put simply, there are less easy wins for an LPO operator in a low-cost jurisdiction to secure because in-house teams are getting more efficient. Okay. The MLS industry based on chronic in-house inefficiencies is petering out. It was during this phase, so over here, the IHL inefficiency era, it's before the two lines intersect. It was during this phase where you could save quite a few dollars, but as you've seen, most of those arrangements are largely failing. The new dawn of managed legal services is about providers who can do things that even the best performing in-house legal teams simply cannot do. Now, remember, in-house teams do not have infinite resources, okay? They do not have infinitely deep wells of experience in everything such as data analytics, from legal technology, etc. But an optimally performing in-house team, right, can do so much. The managed legal services innovation era is effectively what's before us, and it's that intersection point. As you can note, there's this grey area there. The intersection point where we leave the inefficiency era and go into the innovation era of managed legal services, it's not a fixed point in time. So even some of the biggest organizations that we see are still doing things so inefficiently that outsourcing, basic functions associated with, well, it could be research, it could be contract review, etc. You can result in a significant dollar phase. But at some point, they will upgrade their level of skills such that the inefficiency era, the cost savings, will diminish. So the managed legal service innovation era is before us. It's not about cost saving. It can't be about cost saving because talent is cost the same everywhere in the world. And if you're going to innovate, you need the best processes, the best tech, and the best talent. So the innovation era is not about cost saving, it's about getting exponentially more for the same or similar costs. Now, this is really incredible news. It's great news because it means that managed legal services and their delivery teams will be based right next to you. Whether you're in Singapore, whether you're in London, whether you're in New York, that's where the talent, that's where the technology, that's where the best practices are now naturally or increasingly be drawn to. So let's wrap this up. Let's welcome Mav back into our good books. Conclusions. Here's my first conclusion. It's not actually written down there. At no point have I spoken about contracting, how to write a good managed legal services contract. We're all lawyers. It's easy enough to do. Just be sensible. But here are the key conclusions to bear in mind when it comes to managed legal services. Has the industry come full circle? There's an element of that. Outsourced. What was outsourced is now trending to become insourced again in many areas. Does this mean that managed legal services in the industry is dying? Absolutely not. It's transforming. It's evolving into a better state. What you are seeing is that the drivers, the fuel stock for the managed legal services industry is changing from burning on the inefficiency of the in-house environment to one which is fueled by the ability for the provider to deliver genuine innovation, okay? The overall in-house climate, more with less, means that all in-house teams are operating in a transformative state. And as we're sort of a decade into this community-wide awareness that we need to get a lot more done, and we need, that's part of the job, the way in which things are done is inside most in-house teams are upgraded. The IHL step up, as we're called, is actually improving, right, the potential for enhanced managed legal service offering. The idea of it making sense because we can get somebody for $20 through to $100 an hour to looking at something, that is no longer the fuel stock for managed services. It needs to be more. It needs to be more innovative technology, better use of data analytics, and data-driven insights, whole range of different drivers that add value. The bar's been raised for managed legal services to make sense for the in-house community. Now, there's always going to be exceptions around this. As I say, there could be the team that are just so inefficient that sending something to a low-cost jurisdiction for a $50 review is going to make sense. But the bar's been raised. Managed services must be better than an efficiently operating in-house legal team going forward. That's key. That's the expectation that you should set. For the same or similar amount, you should get something much better than you can do yourself. Whether or not you are using managed legal services to address an inefficient or a very optimized process, the established or accepted causes of failure are all well understood and they are readily addressable, particularly if you take our four solution design approach, right? That'll eliminate most problems even before they get a chance to become a problem. Managed services, notwithstanding the overall prevailing wind that it might be a little bit on the nose, is absolutely a viable prospect, but it needs your third party to be managing a process that you know works, that you spent time optimizing. That's when the benefits of managed services will be delivered. Value add is the real theme for managed legal services going forward, okay? You need to be working then with providers that can do better than you on your best day. The future of managed services is therefore innovation-led. To deliver it, it's not just about low cost, right? The third or fourth time that I've touched on this theme, okay? Innovation-led means using the best technologies, the best practices, and accessing the best talent to do that. How you maintain and motivate that talent is a different story. It has its own unique challenges, but you need the best talent if you want the best solution. Costs is always going to remain key. But with managed legal services going forward, you should be getting far more for the same or similar costs. The business case, if you've architected a successful managed legal services strategy, is about achieving a redirect of the strategic focus of the lawyers that you have in your team, whilst having basic tasks and processes of varying complexity depending on the competency of your provider. You can upgrade the complex tasks that the subject of the service, and achieving overall exponentially greater department gains. That's it in a nutshell. Nick.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt. We've got a few questions from the floor for you. First one is, what functions within a legal department tend to be the most successfully outsourced to MLS providers?
If you are new to managed legal services, you absolutely need to start with the most simple tasks. Now, simple doesn't mean that they're easy to do. Simple means that the infrastructure, the processes, the tasks that you need is simple to follow because it's well supported by the infrastructure it needs. For managed legal services, if you look through the lens of contracting, basic low-level contracting reviews are extremely compatible with a MLS-led resourcing approach. Knowledge management, particularly training, can be very well catered for by an MLS provider. There are so many processes inside a in-house legal team. For those that are joining our community event for the first time, I urge you to look at our website, gls-legaloperations.com, and look at the GLS Legal Transformation Tube Map, where we break down the in-house legal environment by reference to 15 different critical functions. And in relation to each of those critical functions, we identify what we call the critical resource enablers of each of those functions. Effectively, it looks like the DNA, the blueprint of the human genome for a strand of human DNA. And every single one of those critical resource elements is just a combination of different processes. As long as the process that you want support with has all the attendant infrastructure, so the policy environment in which it lives, what's acceptable, what's not, what do we need to achieve, the approval process pathway, issues that we look at, how do we respond to those issues, standard language that we use, etc. Almost any process can be successfully subject of a managed legal service. The real question is this. I don't always like to answer a question with a question. What work are you doing that's currently that prevents you from doing the strategic work that your business values, that is considered business enabling, that will drive value recognition? Then of those tasks that you've identified that are keeping you from doing just that, which of those tasks have you actually built the process infrastructure? So look at that process design phase, so that ultimately you could give it to somebody and they could do it in a reliable fashion. That's the way that I would answer that question. But in terms of what typically comes through the door, vendor sign-on, KYC, compliance, basic contract review. Obviously, there's a whole range of areas when it comes to supporting litigation, hunting for key issues and the like. Contract administration, all very routine kind of stuff. There's just a lot of, this is the biggest challenge for the in-house community, is how do we take our focus where most 70% of the time at the moment is spent with sort of grindy tasks, MSA reviews, toner contracts, attending internal meetings, etc. Only in our estimation, around 15% is spent on what's truly valuable to the business, what generates revenue, what's strategic, i.e. new market entries, and then 10% on X factor type projects. So much of what we do inside a legal department can actually be hit by standardization and processification. It's a new verb that we've created at GLS. So pretty much, a huge portion of what we do, but we have to go through that same process of stepping out what that process looks like. Is all the attendant infrastructure we need so that process can be concluded efficiently in place, and then, yeah, there's a whole seminar right there in that very issue in terms of what to start with. But actually, maybe we should give Nick.
Thank you very much. Okay, next question is, how can we be sure that the MLS provider is processing and securing our data appropriately and confidentially?
Yeah. That's on the top 10 list of causes for failure or concerns. It's a mesh approach. It's multi-layered. I'm not going in order of priority, but these are the things that need to be considered. Firstly, what are the obligations that you have around confidentiality? And you can include data privacy. Depending on where you're located, or actually in all circumstances, you need to impose those obligations contractually. Okay. Secondly, and this doesn't happen often enough, is an auditing function needs to occur. Okay. Very rarely do we see customers auditing the performance of a managed legal services arrangement. When you look at an audit, it needs to be a qualitative one. More than contractual obligations that you will do this or sign confidentiality agreements of people working in these centres. Compliance is really a behavioural driven outcome. So your audit needs to be looking at the quality of the training that their people get, the reinforcing materials, whether it's knowledge retention tests, signage around the workplace. You have to look at the actual behavioural practices. You can, depending upon the sensitivity of the data that is located, you can look at mitigating those risks either by locating it in jurisdictions that have better laws, but more importantly, you can ring fence it in terms of the technology infrastructure used by the arrangement. We have arrangements whereby certain clients have located their own server into our facilities, and only they can access it from a international point of view. All work done locally is on that server. These are the three main drivers that you can do, but it does come to you have to manage that. You have to keep that issue first to mind by making it a regular point of discussion when you performance manage that. And I should, just for completeness of the answer, Nick, just also mention there are growing there are an increasing number of regimes depending on where you're located in terms of certifications around your data handling practices. We even have one solution that should be launched on the Legal Operations Centre. Where are we now? Maybe Q3. It's a tool, it's a software-based tool that can plug into an organization's server, and using AI data processing, identify and create a heat map by reference to the technology architecture of that organization, where all sources of confidential and personal information are, and track that heat map back to particular servers. So, it's an issue that a lot of people are concerned about, and it's fortunate that we do live in an environment of greater awareness, but also an increasing abundance of tools that can help manage that. So I hope that helps. More than happy to share more thoughts on that offline to whomever asked that question. Nick, anything else?
Yeah, quick last one. Can we provide some examples of reasonable KPIs that an MLS service provider should be measured against?
Sure. Again, it depends on the managed legal service subject matter. It could be training, it could be discovery, it could be any number of things. But if we were just to stick with the example that we've been using in the in this webinar, and stick with contracting, qualitative KPIs include contract closure times. So if someone's looking at a contract for you, you need to approach your MLS as part of solution design too, by the way, with stage 4 in mind, having collected your historic data. How long is it taking your organization to actually close the contract types of the subject of the MLS arrangement, right? And you'd expect to see compression, right? How long is it actually taking? The amount of support time per contract, right? In and of itself, per one agreement, it's not particularly helpful, but in aggregate, in aggregate, it speaks to the efficiency of the service. I wouldn't recommend that as being one of your essential ones. It's just one of, in a data-rich environment that the service provider can share with you. We also like to look at things like end user satisfaction. Okay, is the internal client happy with how things are going? That might sound a bit wishy-washy, but you've got to remember the internal client has to be happy with what the legal department's delivering. And if the legal department is leveraging an MLS service, you need to make sure that you're aware of that. We like to encourage clients to check on compliance with stated processes and QA assurance. Okay, so we encourage, when we provide the service or when we set these programs up for our clients, because we don't provide every kind of managed legal service, we rather architect these and only provide limited classes of managed legal services. So we do QA sampling, right? Have these issues been looked at and have they been addressed? Okay, that's a really a good KPI to look at, particularly with the AI-based tools that we use. It's very easy to do. If you want to look behind the curtain, retention inside the provider can also be an issue. Who wants to do the same thing over and over again for a long time? No one, right? The best people don't want to do it. Only the worst people are happy to do it. I wouldn't recommend that to be a key one, but it does speak to the stability of your provider. Okay. There's a range of KPIs, and we recommend no more than 6 qualitative KPIs that will tell you everything that you need to know. But it's dependent upon the subject, the managed legal services arrangement. If you wanted to ping me an email after and tell me specifically what kind of process that you're looking to put to an MLS provider, more than happy to recommend a KPI regime for you to consider. It's one of the things that we offer. You can find solutions for that on the Legal Operations Centre. KPIs for legal department performance, holder department, and also process specific.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Matt. So that, I think, we'll draw it to a close. To everyone who attended today, thank you for your time. A recording of today's webinar will be uploaded to the GLS website and free to view in the next couple of days. So please do feel free to pass it on to any friends and colleagues who you think would be interested. And on that, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, everyone.